As men, especially as doctors, sometimes we hyper-focus on our career, neglecting other facets of our lives. But that is about to change. This is Dads Before Doctors. Some physicians claim their family is their top priority, but their lives tell a very different story. We'll help each other become family men who are doctors rather than doctors who have families. If it's health, wealth and legacy, emotional well-being, parenting, professional goals, or marriage, we're talking about it. Thanks for listening, and make sure to subscribe. This is Dads Before Doctors, and this is your host, Adam Broussard, MD.
All right, welcome back to Dads Before Doctors podcast. Today we have a wonderful guest. Doc G is here with us, also known as Jordan. He joins us. He was previously a palliative care physician who now is a podcast host and blogger in financial space, and soon to be published author. Welcome, Jordan. I'm glad to have you here. Is there anything else you want to share with our audience, a little bit more about yourself?
Well, thank you first and foremost for having me on. I'm actually still a part-time hospice and palliative care doctor. My story starts way back when my father was a doctor and he died when I was 8 years old. And of course, I wanted to be just like him. So I went on this whole long journey of becoming a doctor and realizing at some point that it wasn't giving me the joy I thought it would be. I got kind of burned out. And like a lot of us in medicine, I found that there was a lot of administrative work and much less taking care of people than I wanted to. At that point, I discovered financial independence and had enough money to pull away from medicine. And the last few years, I've been really trying to work on what a good life looks like. And for me, what that meant was leaving a lot of the medicine that I had been practicing. I had been doing general primary care, lots of nursing home work, hospital work, and instead doing part-time hospice and palliative care work, as well as pursuing my passions, things like podcasting and talking about personal finance and financial independence. So that's kind of what's landed me, I think, in front of this mic today.
So you mentioned kind of growing up with your dad being a practicing physician, and then learning about financial independence later in life as a physician. What was your relationship with money when you were raised, and what were you taught about money, up until that point?
So I was very lucky. I had amazing financial modeling as a child. So after my father died, my mom happened to be in business school at the time. And so she started working as an accountant. She remarried, and my mom and my stepdad were very savvy with money. They invested in the stock market. They owned real estate. My mom eventually went into her own business, which she ran. My stepdad was the CEO of a major healthcare company. He also had his own side business. He used to sell coins because it was a personal hobby of his. So I grew up with this really great financial model. We didn't really talk about it. We didn't discuss it, but it was obvious to me they were saving greater than 50% of their income. They were investing. We spent money, but we didn't do it frivolously. And so by the time I started learning about all of my finances, by the time I actually went to the books and the blogs and the podcasts, I was doing mostly the right things because I was copying my parents. So I was very lucky that way.
That's wonderful. It's great to have those role models, and it's important for us to realize just how much you learned, along the way, so that we can be the positive role model for our kids along the way too.
Yeah, it was a true privilege. And the other thing that I often tell people is, my father died and his life insurance money went actually into the stock market, and that ended up paying for my college and medical school. So I actually started off in a very good, strong financial position by just not having any medical school debt.
So how did you discover, financial independence and, more about finances, then you decided to dive deep into it?
So it's a funny story. I was practicing medicine. I owned my own practice at the time, and I kind of knew deep down inside that I didn't want to spend the next 20, 30 years doing what I was doing. I was getting tired. I was exhausted. I was getting phone calls every night. I wasn't spending as much time with my family or my kids that I wanted to be. And even when I was too busy taking phone calls all the time. And at the time, I was blogging about medicine. This was back in 2013, 2014. I actually had a blog that I called In My Humble Opinion that I had been writing since maybe 2005. Wow. And it was kind of creative writing about the journey of being a doctor and what it felt like. And I was in my office seeing patients, and I got a phone call. And the guy on the other line said, look, I just wrote a book about medicine and money, and I was hoping that you could review it for your blog. I mean, he was asking lots of bloggers to do this to get the word out about his book. And the guy was Jim Dolly, and the book was The White Coat Investor. And so I was like, sure, you're going to send me a free book to read? I thought that was the greatest thing ever. He sent me his book. I read it, I think, in one sitting in like 4 or 5 hours. And it gave me the vocabulary to understand all the questions I had about finances. And also it helped me realize why all those things my parents had modeled for me were working. And so all of a sudden I had a framework to say, this is what financial independence is. This is how you calculate enough money. And then I could go back and look at my own finances and say, you know what? I actually have enough money. That if I wanted to stop practicing medicine that day, I could. And it was a big surprise. It was exciting and exhilarating. And I say that all of for about 5 minutes. And then I became incredibly panicked because this idea of leaving medicine, something that was more of a pie in the sky idea, all of a sudden became very real. And then I had to come to terms with this idea of my own identity, my connection to my father, and leaving something that had really been a big part of my personal journey for, the last 20 years.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a huge thing, both like that kind of golden handcuffs that a lot of physicians have, and then that being so wrapped up in your persona of yourself and what other people, view you as. I know I've had, conversations with non-physicians and physicians alike, like, well, what do you mean you would want to leave? You've worked so hard. You've spent so much time in doing this. And, how could you walk away from it? Or don't you owe society or, whatever? What did you say to those, those external forces that are like, how could you want to leave medicine? How could you want to, go part-time? After all this time, all this money, all this, whatever their reasons are.
So just as you suppose, there were a lot of people who invested in me being a doctor as well as I had, right? I had family, I had friends, my parents. Like I was the kid who told everyone I wanted to be a doctor at 8 years old after my father died. So this was a big part of my identity. On the other hand, it became really clear that this wasn't bringing me happiness. Like it didn't feel comfortable. It didn't feel like my purpose. And that was the conversation I had, especially like with my mom and my family. I kind of said, look, this might be what I envisioned that I was supposed to be, but it no longer feels right. So yes, I mean, I guess you could look at it and say, boy, all the time and money I put into becoming this thing, but I wouldn't discount the importance of those years I spent becoming and then eventually doctoring. I think they were immensely gratifying. I think I learned a lot. I think I helped people. I think I created wealth for myself and my family. Like, I don't think it was wasted time. I just started to feel like I had come to the natural end of what I was going to do in medicine. Like, I felt like I had learned everything I was going to learn. I had helped people. I had become an intimate part of people's lives. But the good stuff no longer felt good anymore. So I don't see it as wasted time. I don't see it as wasted education or money. I feel like it was part of my path. And I had just naturally come to the end of one road and was ready to begin a new one.
So you mentioned that you didn't feel like that was your purpose anymore. How did you go about discovering what your purpose was? You were having that blog, and how did you determine that, whether that was just a passion project versus your purpose, I guess?
I knew at that point when I discovered financial independence and discovered that I didn't need to work anymore, that I was in the midst of a huge conundrum. And in fact, I did become quite depressed and anxious because I had to really question who I was, and I had to let go of some of that connection to my father, right? My father died when I was really young, and I had spent a lot of years trying to walk in his shoes. And that's good and bad. It's good because it did give me a purpose and something that I really did enjoy for quite a while. On the other hand, I realized that it was time to step out of those shoes and start learning to become my own person. But then, of course, the inevitable question is, who am I and what feels purposeful to me? I didn't know yet. I knew that after learning about personal finance and that I had been doing all these things in my life, like owning real estate and starting businesses and doing all these kind of financy things anyway, I knew that that was something I liked and was interested in. So that was a start. And so I started a blog about personal finance. But what it really was is it was an attempt to create an online diary of who I've become, what I thought was important, and where I wanted to go in my life. And I actually, for quite a while, wrote every single day and hit publish at the end of every day. And what that did is it really helped me work through my thoughts and feelings. Like, what's important to me? What do I like doing? What don't I like doing? And so I started by doing two things. One is I started subtracting the things out of my work life I didn't like. So I didn't want to just drop out of medicine and disappear. Instead, I said, well, let's do it gradually. What can I start getting rid of that's giving me lots of stress, that's causing friction in my life? So, I was part of a private practice and it was a concierge practice. So I'd go to people's homes and I was really on call all the time and I was quite busy. So the first thing I did is I got rid of that, which relieved quite a bit of stress. But I was still seeing nursing home patients. I was still doing hospice and palliative care, et cetera. So over years, I said, okay, the nursing home stuff is really starting to stress me out too. I'm still getting calls in the middle of the night. So I got rid of that. And then I was just doing hospice work. But for a while, I was just doing hospice work, but I didn't want to do any weekend work and I didn't want to do any calls. So I said, okay, I'm not going to be an employee. I'm just going to be a private contractor. And I'll work with hospice as a private contractor and I'll tell them what I want to do. I'm not willing to take phone calls at nights. I'm not willing to work on the weekends, but I'm willing to take phone calls between 8 to 5 and I'm willing to do these administrative meetings, et cetera, et cetera. So I whittled down my professional activities to exactly what I wanted them to be. And the way I did that is I said, if I wasn't being paid, would I still do this job? And I found that what I was left with, the hospice and palliative care work, even if the company came to me and said, you know what, I don't want to pay you anymore, but it would be really great if you kept working because these people need you, I would keep doing that. So I was able first, so I didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I said, I'm doing this job as a physician. Is there something worth keeping there? And so that was the first part of finding my purpose, was finding what was worth keeping in the life I had already built. That was step one. Step two was then saying, okay, now I've opened up all the space in my life. I'm working maybe 15 hours a week. What do I do with the rest of my time? I knew I liked writing. I knew I liked public speaking. All throughout my physician career, I had always hoarded away little bits of time so I could do things like write or do other type stuff where I was communicating and creating. But I never gave myself permission to put more time or energy into it because I wasn't making money doing that. So the next thing was to say, okay, what are all those things you always wish you had time to do, but you don't because you're working? And so for me, that was writing. Eventually that became podcasting, public speaking, all things I said, wow, I really like doing those things, but I've never given myself the permission to. And so that was really easy for me to jump into that life. I knew I liked personal finance and I started saying yes to things, right? So my friend said, hey, let's start a podcast. That was a scary idea. I had never done that before, but I think when you're searching for purpose, if you can open up and say, okay, I'm going to try a bunch of things and see what sticks. After all these different iterations, what I actually found is probably my true purpose in life. What I really love doing is I love interviewing people. And that's why I really like doing a podcast. That's the thing I most enjoy in life. And it took me a while to find that. It took me relieving myself of the responsibility of making money doing that. Mm-hmm. But it was a bunch of trial and error. So I'd say, looking at your life, subtracting out the bad things you don't want to do anymore, seeing what you want to stick with, saying yes to a bunch of stuff, trying to think about those things that you always wanted to do, but never felt you had enough time, And then for me, it was really this process of writing every day and thinking about who am I, what do I want, and what does it mean to me? And I think between all of that, it became much more clear what my purpose was.
Yeah, I think that's huge and very inspirational. Journaling, whether, for yourself or put it out there like you did and pressing, publish on a blog, like just being able to get those thoughts out of your head and onto paper, onto the screen, like is really cathartic and really helps you kind of create that direction of designing the life that you want to lead. So I think a lot of physicians in general, kind of fall into like living life by default, and like just they end up, go through med school, go through residency. Okay, now I'm attending. Like I just do what everyone else does, and we don't really take the time to think about the life we want to live. We're just living the life everyone else is living, and we don't really think about what we're good at or what we're passionate about or what our purpose is, because we've invested so much in this. We just think that is our purpose. Like we're a doctor and that's what it is. But I know, talking to other physicians that have gone part-time, left, and other entrepreneurs, like it seems to be a recurring theme, kind of like what you said, that once you have that wide open space, it's amazing what comes to you, and having the ability to say yes. You never know what opportunity is going to come your way. And I think your journey really speaks to that. So I applaud you for taking that chance. What do you have any other advice for someone that has kind of got to that position? They realize that either one, that medicine isn't fulfilling their purpose anymore, or isn't their passion anymore, and might not be at that financial independence stage, versus someone that realizes they're at financial independence and they now have the opportunity to say no to certain things. Do you have any different advice between those two groups?
So I feel like we've always made this major mistake, is that we try to put our finances first and then try to start looking at kind of what our purpose, identity, and connections, or what we want them to be in the world. So my advice is actually to start with your purpose, identity, and connections. Figure out who you are first, regardless of where you are, right? Regardless of whether you are $500,000 in debt, whether you're at the break-even point, or whether you have some money saved. I still think you have to start there. Once you have a better idea of what your purpose is, what you want to do with life, whether that has to do with medicine or not, then you can start thinking about your finances, because there's always wiggle room, right? So if you start saying, like me, my purpose is to do a podcast, I'm not going to make a lot of money on a podcast, but it's really going to bring me joy and fulfill me. It's really easy to do that when you're financially independent, like I was. But let's say I was $200,000 in debt. I could have, and I was just coming out of residency, right? So at least knowing my purpose, I could have started making decisions based on that and trying to build that into my life. So maybe I don't quit medicine. Maybe I do a 3/4 job or a half-time job, which allows me enough money to pay my bills. Maybe I have enough money to save a little bit, but then I can start doing other things like podcasting or interviewing people or learning another trade or something that interests me that feels more aligned with my passion. And then you do that for years, and then you keep on reassessing. Maybe you're doing a little better financially. You can do even a little less doctoring. Maybe then you do a little more of what you want. Or better yet, maybe you find a way to incorporate your passion into your job. So maybe you work for a big medical system and they say, we're going to pay you full time, but we'd like you to spend at least 1/4 to half of your time doing social media stuff for our hospital system. We want you to create a podcast. We want you to write a blog, and that's going to be part of your professional pay. So once you kind of start realizing what your purpose is, then you can start toggling your work life. But if you don't really put any time or thought or energy into what you think your purpose is, you're going to be flailing around trying to make money and probably be relatively miserable. Financial independence is a great goal, but I'd rather tell someone put off financial independence for 20 years and build the life you want now, doing what you like to do now, and enjoy the next 20 years, as opposed to grinding away at something you hate for 10 years and being miserable, but then saying after 10 years, okay, now I can do what I want. Some people say, I'd rather be miserable and grind away for 10 years, but I think a good portion of us would rather start building that purpose into our life now, because once you find you're doing things you like to do that bring you joy, that feel good on the inside, that help you maintain a sense of identity that you like, really the purpose of financial independence is only to allow you to do those things more. So if you can build those into your life now, you don't really have to be financially independent now. You just have to be financially secure. And so that's what I tell people at the beginning is think about what you want your purpose to be, and then build your financial life around that, because then at least you can, with clear eyes, make some decisions about what's worth sacrificing and what isn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely about the journey and not necessarily the end point. And the earlier that you learn that in your time, the easier it is to go about determining what your purpose and passion is, and then design your life. You know, unfortunately, some people get too far into, you know, that debt and payments, and like you have to work X amount just to pay, you know, the $2 million house, the, you know, $100,000 car, the private school, the, you know, and then you have a lot less options. Actually, in the middle of a book that talks a lot about it, Life in Air. And that's what the first principle is, determining, like designing your life, designing your vision. And like I said, a lot of people just are on default and, you know, expand their debts and their life and whatnot as their finances expand. And then it's so much harder to climb out of that. So with the new book coming out, can you tell us a little bit about, you know, why you chose to write it and a little bit about the book?
So the book is titled Taking Stock, a Hospice Doctor's Advice on Financial Independence, Building Wealth, and Living a Regret-Free Life. I've been on this financial journey, and I've juxtaposed that with this story of being a hospice and palliative care doctor. So I take care of people usually in the last 6 months of their lives. And I found it interesting that we in the financial independence and personal finance world spend so much time thinking about money and creating wealth. And yet the people who I take care of who are dying, that's the last thing on their mind. They're much more worried about, did they do the things in life they wanted to do? Did they mend the relationships that were broken? Did they leave a legacy for themselves and their family? So to me, I found it incredibly interesting as a hospice doctor. I was learning all these lessons that seem so important to my life as a personal finance podcaster. And the idea behind this book was to say, hey, the dying have some really important things to teach us about money and life. Let me tell you some stories that help clarify why we're doing it wrong. And so I wouldn't call the book a criticism of the financial independence movement, but I do say that we can use these ideas from people who are dying to help clarify the way we think about money and how much time and thought we put into it. And so that was the idea behind the book, is to expand that conversation. We talk a lot about money, but sometimes we confuse it as a goal instead of a tool. I think the dying help teach us that money is just a tool that hopefully helps us pursue our sense of purpose and identity in the world. And so why don't we start doing that now instead of waiting until we're on our deathbed, right? So when you're diagnosed with a terminal illness, all of a sudden it forces you to think about these things you've been putting off forever. Who am I? What do I want to accomplish? What's important? It's much easier to think about things like money. You say, I want to have this much money, or I want to retire. And so we make that the all important goal. But in a sense, to me, that's low hanging fruit. The deeper, harder questions are, who am I and who do I want to be? And why am I putting these types of things off until I'm ultimately forced to, when there's an expiration date on my life? Why aren't I thinking about this when I'm 20 or 30 or 40? when I'm building a career and when I'm building a life, maybe we should start asking these questions now much sooner.
Well, then, and being in medicine, especially palliative care, like sometimes those hospice patients are 40, 50, not 90. Like if you're so focused on what you're building for the future and not focused on the journey to get there, time is our only finite resource. You can make more money, you can, create whatever, but it's a tool for you to get more time. Like you mentioned, you cut out those things that you didn't enjoy in your job so that you had more time to spend with your family, to pursue other activities, and rather than to be a slave to your finances. Having you could have had XYZ saved, but if your expenses were 10 times what they were, you would have had to keep working.
Yeah.
So
listen, I mean, my father died at 40. Yeah. Right. So just like you're talking about, you don't know how much time you have. Right. And so there's this difficult dichotomy because we want to be smart and save for the future and save for retirement. That's all about deferred gratification. On the other hand, we want to enjoy today, especially because there may not be a tomorrow. So you want to understand YOLO, right? You only live once. So the hard part is trying to decide how to toggle between the two, like how to defer gratification so you can save some for retirement so that you do have a good future ahead of you. On the other hand, how do you realize and know when to say, forget it, I'm going to spend this money now and go have fun, even though that money I'm spending now would compound in the stock market and be worth 10 times more in a few years. It's not worth that much to me if I die tomorrow, or it's not worth that much to me if I live the next bunch of years miserable because I'm never doing anything I want. And so continuously trying to figure out how to balance those two is not easy.
I mean, and a lot of times people are so focused on reaching that number, whatever that number is, and they're taking jobs in random locations that they hate, or they're working 80 hours a week and not seeing their wife, their kids, their other family that's not in that location, and missing out on all that, so that one day they come up and have that number, and maybe their wife isn't there anymore, or maybe they don't know their wife anymore. So now you have all this free time with a stranger. Your kids, have grown up without you and they want nothing to do with you. Like trying to, and that's a big reason, I started this podcast is, trying to look at those things outside of work. There's plenty of, physician finance things about learning how to do the next side gig, or the next, how to invest in real estate, or how to, put 80% of your salary into the stock market or whatever. But we seem to lose out on, that focus on your marriage, or your relationship with your kids, or your relationship with yourself, even like taking care of your own health and your own mental and physical health, that we tend to ignore at the expense to take care of our patients, or to build our wealth, or whatever. And then you're not in a place to have that relationship with your family, or to what.
Mm. And let me mention, I love this idea of focusing on a number because we're so good at it. We kind of say, oh, when I have $1 million, or I have $1.5 million, or whatever it is. I think there are two problems with that. One is what I call overdrive. Once you get to that $1 million, you actually find that money has been a goal for so long. The next thought is, okay, I just made it to $1 million. How do I make it to 2 million? So in other words, we get a big endorphin hit by reaching that goal. But before we know it, we're starting to look towards the next goal, which tends to be the next monetary level. That's one problem. The other problem is loss aversion, which is a very human issue. Once we hit that monetary number we want, as we all know, the stock market goes ups and downs. We get unexpected costs, all sorts of things happen. We're petrified of losing that money. So even once you hit that $1 million or whatever it is, we spend a lot of time and emotional energy worrying about maintaining it and not losing it. When you make those things your goals, it's a very slippery slope. You don't actually find yourself as happy as when you look for the more deeper things like your sense of purpose and what truly gratifies you, whether that's human relationships or whether that's hobbies or whether that's other types of goals. Those things are a lot more durable than some number, but it's really easy to focus on the number. And that's the mistake I think we make.
Yeah, I really like the analogy. And the one thing that, all of these, your marriage or kids, whatnot, are these glass balls, and work and finances and stuff are rubber balls. You can drop them and pick them up at another time. But if you drop, these more important things in life, they shatter and it's kind of over with.
Yeah, I think that's a great metaphor.
So, any additional advice on people that are, looking to make a career change, and how you determined you were ready? Was it, on a number, or how did you make that decision to actually take the leap?
So I think first and foremost, I always tell people, take it slowly, right? Most of the time, there's no reason to make an immediate change right away. So first and foremost, think it out. For me, it took literally writing every day for a year to really start to get my emotions and thoughts ready to make such a big leap. 2, I still think it's important to look at what currently works in your life, and are there some things that you can spare? So again, ER physicians are a perfect example. Could you work, 1 shift a week or 2 shifts a week and still make some income, still connect to that piece of the job you really liked, but then again, create the space to do what you want to do? I think above and beyond that, it's a matter of looking at your finances and figuring out if you are in the position you need to be to start making those changes. And if not, start looking at your finances and trying to figure out what would get you there. Awesome.
So you're now several hundred episodes in and years into your blogging. What would you say are some of the biggest takeaways that you've learned on this journey?
Big takeaways I've learned in this journey. First and foremost, community and connections is incredibly important. In fact, a lot of what truly brings me joy today are the people that I've become connected with and the community I now feel a part of. And I never had success up until now building such connections or community. And I never understood why until I got to this place. And the reason why I could never build connections and community before is my sense of identity and purpose were so wrapped up in being a physician, but that outer identity didn't fit what I felt like on the inside. So I didn't hang out in the doctor's lounge. I didn't have lots of doctor friends. When I went to a restaurant, I didn't say reservation for Dr. So-and-so. In fact, when I would go to parties, I would avoid assiduously answering the question, what do you do for a living? Because in a sense, I almost felt embarrassed. It felt strange. I never knew why until I realized, because that didn't fit me. That identity I had held on to for so long wasn't truly who I was. When I started delving into communicating and podcasting and blogging, the more creative side, I started becoming friends with people. And I didn't have that kind of shame and embarrassment and disconnection that I always had when I was trying to do it in the physician world. When you start figuring out your purpose and identity, all of a sudden, kind of the community portion falls in place. So that's kind of a big message that I've gleaned through all of these activities. And life with a community and with connections outside of your family. So, of course, I'm a husband and a father and a son. I've got wonderful family connections. I always did. But feeling a sense of outer purpose and connection to the world and finding a community out there in the world only happened once I figured out who I really was and started doing the things that felt purposeful to me. And once I did that, everything kind of fell into place. And I think ultimately that's most important, right? Because one way or another, people say they don't want to work anymore, but we're all going to work. Whether you retire from your job, you're going to do some kind of work. You're going to do a podcast. You're going to do a blog. You're going to start a business. You're going to volunteer. You're going to do something that other people eventually would call work. So the goal is not to get away from work. The goal is not to make money, because ultimately we really need enough money to provide us the basics and to survive. The real goal is connecting, I think, with other people who care about the things you care about, who look at the world in a way that gratifies you and that helps you feel connected. And I think that's what I've really gleaned from all this is I had to find out who I was, and I had to find out what I was meant to do to ultimately connect to other people out there in the world. And I think that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of crazy in the world that we live in today that we are so uber connected to everyone that we've ever been in our life. Like one click away on Facebook or whatever, and you know exactly what your, high school girlfriend's doing or whatever. And how lonely it really is.
Yeah.
And especially when you're in that situation that you're not living that same life as your coworkers. You're not driven by the same things as them. Like you mentioned, not going to the doctor's lounge and stuff because you weren't interested in the same things that they were talking about in there. You didn't care about, the new boat they're buying or the new Porsche or whatever. Like you had a different purpose and meaning, and being able to define that community, outside of your physical community that you're in. And even meeting people from different walks of life and realizing that they're going through a lot of the same things. I've connected with a lot of entrepreneurs, and, they're the same things that, we're talking about as physicians. When we really get vulnerable and talk about it, it's the same things they're going through.
Yeah. And, it's really kind of gratifying and strange and brings everything full circle is some of the most wonderful conversations I've been able to have is when my new community, this personal finance, podcasting, communicating community, there have been a number of times over the last few years where they've called me and said, you know what, I just found out, my dad's dying or my grandmother's dying and they're in hospice. What should I do? And then I can use what I learned as a profession, that thing that wasn't making me happy before, but now I've found a place that it does. And I can give them advice and I can be there for them. And it's kind of like this really nice bringing together of my worlds. And I can look back in my career and say it wasn't wasted. Like the things I did were important and I learned these wonderful skills and I can use them to help people I care about. And it's really this nice circular feeling of everything connected.
That's amazing how powerful and how things get, reconnected like that. So what is one thing that people don't ask you that you wish they would ask you on interviews like this and whatnot?
What people don't ask me? I think my one piece of advice to people, and we don't always talk about this, but I think it's common knowledge, but I think it's worth saying again, is I think if you want to be successful, you have to learn how to really fail a lot. And I don't think we talk about that enough. I don't think we talk about all the times we failed. This book that I'm writing is my third or fourth iteration after rewriting it multiple times. I've self-published a number of books. These things don't necessarily come easy, but only when you learn how to fail over and over and over again, I think, do you eventually get to succeed. But the other side of that is then you have to learn how to forgive yourself. You got to learn how to forgive yourself for not succeeding, and you have to learn how to forgive yourself for failing. And we have to learn how to be easier on ourselves and then just start the process all over again. You try, sometimes you succeed, often you fail, you forgive yourself and you start again. And I think that's a big part of success, whether it's your finances, whether it's finding your purpose, whether it's becoming part of a community. It all comes down to kind of the same process.
I think that's really hard for a lot of physicians to admit, because I think a lot of us are in that fixed mindset, and a lot of stuff has come so easy to us, and that's how we got where we are. And when we fail at work, there may be somebody's life on the line. So being able to accept accept that failure outside and take that as a learning opportunity to how to, pivot and move forward. And, that discomfort of doing something new or failing is what's going to really, truly, help us grow and help us become the person that we're trying to become. So I think that is wonderful advice. So how can people connect with you? Where can we find the book?
So the easiest way is just to go to my website. There are a few of them, jordangrumet.com. That's JORDANGRUMET.com. You can find out everything about the book, as well as connect to kind of the other hubs of my activity. One is the podcast. It's the Earn and Invest podcast. That's earnandinvest.com. But again, if you go to jordangrumet.com, you can be connected to all that, as well as my blog, which is diversify.com. Again, I won't go through all that, but you can find it all there. The book will be on Amazon. It comes out August 2nd. Check it out. It is a different look at personal finance and financial independence. It's seeing it through the lens of what people who are terminally ill regret, and then trying to take that knowledge and help us build a better life today, way before we get to that point where we're terminally ill. So I think the dying have lots to teach us. And this is an attempt to really kind of put it out there and show what it can tell us about our lives and about our financial lives, as well as our personal lives.
I look forward to reading the book, and I'm really grateful that you took this time to chat with us and with our listeners. Thank you again, and we'll put those websites in the show notes so that people can connect with you. Have a great day.
Excellent. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to the Dads Before Doctors podcast. Family men who are doctors rather than doctors who have families. In an evolving and ever fast-paced world, we cannot lose sight of our real priorities. We hope you enjoyed the show. We know we had fun. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and tell a friend about the show. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from the show, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at dadsbeforedoctors.com. Questions, comments, suggestions? Email adam@dadsbeforedoctors.com. And find us on Facebook and Instagram at Dads Before Doctors. Remember, the host of this show is not your doctor, your coach, or your financial advisor. This show is strictly for entertainment. Till next time, this is Dads Before Doctors, signing off.